Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Evan returns to unveil the dream home he built with his own hands, he finds it barricaded and stolen by a rogue HOA he never joined. What begins as a property dispute spirals into a high-stakes war of forged documents, legal revenge, and a fight for freedom. I'd been gone for just over 2 weeks, conference in Boston, plus a surprise detour to Portland to visit the firm's renewable systems lab. Productive trip, sure, but all I could think about during the flight back was showing Mia the house. Not the blueprints, not the 3D renderings I used to bore her with over wine. The actual finished house, my house, the one I'd spent nearly 4 years building from the literal ground up. We pulled into the neighborhood just after sunset, her hand still resting on my knee, warm and steady. The slope of the hill was familiar now, the clean grid of houses below it, each one HOA approved and soulless, like a row of bottled smiles. But my property sat just above the last paved loop, tucked behind a natural rise and a line of stubborn pines, secluded, quiet, mine, until it wasn't. At first I thought I'd made a wrong turn. The gate, my gate, was sealed shut with rough planks crossed in an X, bolted directly into the post I'd installed with my own damn hands. Bright red signs were nailed across them. Private property, HOA, authorized access only. My stomach dropped. Behind the gate, 2 men stood in matching navy shirts with Clearview Pines HOA Compliance Patrol stitched on the breast. One of them had his arms crossed. The other was already raising his phone like he was filming a bear sighting. Mia leaned forward, her brows furrowed. This normal?" "No," I said, too flatly. I parked right in front of the blockade and got out, careful not to slam the door. The one with the phone stepped forward. He was built like an ex-Marine trying to hold on to the fantasy. Buzz-cut, tactical boots, clipboard under his arm. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to step back. You're not authorized to enter this property." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "You're not listed in our HOA's registry. That makes this a restricted zone. If you attempt to cross the gate, we'll be forced to call law enforcement." "I'm Evan Rachel," I said, reaching for my wallet. "This is my land. I bought it 6 years ago. House was completed 3 months back. Want to see the deed?" "Doesn't matter if you think it's yours," the other one chimed in. He was older, stockier, with a smirk that made me want to flatten him. "If you're not in the system, you're not welcome. You'll need to coordinate access with Clearview Pines HOA. I'm not in the system because I'm not a member. This lot was sold privately. I never signed anything with the HOA, and it was never part of the development tract." "Then maybe you should have thought twice before dropping a modernist box in the middle of our community," he said. "You've already disrupted the aesthetic standards." That was it. I opened the gate, or tried to. The boards didn't budge. They'd used carriage bolts sunk deep into my own damn posts. For a second, I couldn't speak. The rage just hovered there, dry and crackling, like a live wire against my teeth. "I'm going to say this very clearly," I said, keeping my voice level. "This is private property. You're trespassing. Remove your blockade and leave." "You're escalating," clipboard guy said, tapping on his phone. "I'm recording this for safety purposes, and we're calling the police." Mia stepped out of the car behind me, quiet but watchful. I caught her eye. She didn't look scared. Not yet. But I was. Not of the 2 idiots in polo shirts, but of what this meant. What kind of storm was brewing here? "You're making a mistake," I said one last time. They didn't answer. One was on the phone with dispatch, already muttering possible unauthorized entry. The other kept filming, stepping around me slowly like I might lunge. For a second, I considered forcing the gate. I thought of the foundation pour, the steel rebar I carried on my shoulders, the weekends I spent staining reclaimed wood with bare hands, but I turned back to the car. "Let's go." I told Mia. "This isn't over. Not even close." We drove off in silence. Her hand never left my arm. That night, I opened every folder, pulled every deed, printout, zoning map, legal notice, county filing I'd kept. I scanned it all into a single PDF and sent it to my attorney with a 2-line subject. "They blocked my house. HOA goons. Police involved." The reply came back within 10 minutes. "Don't step foot on the property until I review. But start documenting everything. Every call, every email, every second." It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was war. The next morning, I was parked 2 blocks down from the lot with a coffee that had long since gone cold in my hand. The gate was still sealed. The same 2 wannabe paramilitary rejects were there, standing guard like this was a military checkpoint and not someone else's goddamn front yard. The boards over the entry looked even more obscene in daylight, like a giant middle finger hammered into my dream. At precisely 10:05, a Salt Lake County Sheriff's cruiser pulled up. 2 officers stepped out. One looked about my age, businesslike, sunglasses tight to his face. The other, grayer, paunchier, had that look of a man who'd seen enough suburban bullshit for a dozen lifetimes. My lawyer, Mark Feldman, met me on the sidewalk with a folder full of printouts. "Play it cool," he muttered. "Don't react. Let them hang themselves." We approached together. One of the patrol guards was already in the officers' faces, pointing at my house like it was the site of a crime. "There he is." The man barked. "That's him. The guy from yesterday tried to force entry into restricted property." I laughed. Loudly. Probably too loudly. "This restricted property is mine," I said, handing over my ID and the first copy of the deed. "Purchased from John Patterson in March of 2019. Here's the bill of sale, the plat map, and the exclusion from the HOA charter filed the same year." The younger cop skimmed the documents. He was quiet, professional. The older one looked over at the gate, then back to me. "You say this is your property." "I don't say it. I can prove it. Want to see county tax records?" Behind us, clipboard guy interjected. "They're irrelevant. HOA boundaries were updated last year. His parcel is now within our district." Mark's eyebrow twitched. "That's not how easement law works. You can't retroactively assign jurisdiction over land the HOA never legally governed. Show us the filed amendment to the CC&Rs. "I'll wait." Clipboard guy froze. The older officer sighed. "Look, I'm not a zoning lawyer, but I see 2 different claims to a piece of property, and I don't see a violent threat, so I'm not arresting anyone." "But we're asking for a temporary removal," said the other HOA man, voice rising, "until the jurisdiction is verified." And then the younger cop, who had been quiet until now, turned to me and said something I didn't expect. "Do you have anywhere else you can go today, sir?" I stared at him. "I don't need to go anywhere. That's my home." He lowered his voice, clearly trying to de-escalate. "I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying, until this gets untangled, you showing up might make things worse." Mark stepped forward. "My client has every right to be here. What you're suggesting is de facto displacement based on a bureaucratic dispute, without court order." The younger cop looked uncomfortable. "Look, I'm not trying to take sides, but we don't want this escalating into a physical altercation." "And that's exactly what happens when you refuse to enforce property rights," Mark snapped. "You're enabling illegal occupancy. That blockade is trespassing." The HOA goons looked smug. The police looked indifferent. And I looked at the house I'd built with my own damn hands, now trapped behind plywood and paranoia, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not rage, but something colder. Focus. The kind that doesn't break when met with resistance. "I'm going to leave," I said finally. "Not because you're right, not because you have authority, but because I'm going to let you build this hole deeper." Then I looked at clipboard guy. "Every second you keep that gate blocked, you're adding to the case I'm building. You better hope your HOA has deep pockets." We walked back to the car. As we pulled away, I saw the 2 patrolmen giving each other a high five. That night, Mark and I got to work. We pulled the subdivision maps, the CC&Rs for Clearview Pines, every county record on file. And that's when we found it. The updated jurisdiction map the HOA had filed just 3 months ago, attempting to redraw its boundary lines to include properties outside its legal domain, including mine. It had no signatures from affected property owners, no approvals from the county planning board, just a notarized form and a bunch of digital overlays stuffed into the registrar's office like it was some forgotten DMV filing. Mark leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. These idiots really thought no one would look. "Oh," I said. "They're going to wish no one had." By Tuesday morning, Mark had already drafted the first round of letters, 1 to the HOA, 1 to the county assessor's office, and 1 to the planning commission. The wording was surgical. "Your organization has filed unauthorized boundary amendments. My client's property lies outside your jurisdiction. Remove all obstructions immediately, or we will pursue injunctive relief and damages." Nothing dramatic. Just a scalpel across the jugular. Meanwhile, I requested an in-person meeting with the Land Records Department. I wasn't interested in emails. I wanted to look someone in the eye and ask why the hell my property was suddenly marked in faded green ink on a map it was never part of. Mark and I met with Linda Bishop, the deputy county recorder, late 50s, tired eyes, sharp mind. She greeted us with a stack of manila folders and a very neutral expression. "Mr. Rachel," she said, flipping through documents. "It seems your lot was recently included in a supplemental boundary overlay filed by Clearview Pines HOA, dated June of this year." "Under what authority?" Mark asked before I could speak. "Because I don't see county signatures. No board approval, no notices sent to adjacent parcel owners." Linda sighed. "They filed it under Section 1223B, claiming prior community integration as justification. I can't validate its legal weight. That's up to a court." "Community integration," I repeated. "I haven't even had a barbecue with these people. They literally tried to have me arrested." Linda slid a photocopy across the desk. It was a letter on Clearview Pines letterhead titled Notification of Voluntary Jurisdiction Consent. My name was typed across the top. My signature was at the bottom. It wasn't mine. Mark stared at it for 2 seconds before letting out a slow, flat curse. "That's forgery." I leaned closer. The signature was close, but not exact. My actual signature had a specific hook in the R, and this one had it too, but exaggerated, like someone trying too hard. Sloppy, confident. Mark asked Linda if she could provide a copy of the original scan. She nodded and handed over a digital file on a thumb drive. We left the building in silence. By the time we reached his office, Mark was already talking about civil fraud statutes. "This isn't just a zoning dispute anymore," he said. "This is criminal territory. They forged a signature, submitted it to a government office. That's felony territory in Utah. And they're still standing in front of my house like mall cops with delusions of grandeur," I muttered. That evening, we returned to the property, not to confront, just to observe. I brought a drone, flew it from the public road to capture aerial shots of the gate, the house, and, most importantly, the exact boundary lines using GPS overlays. The footage was clean, time-stamped, and irrefutable. And then, as if the day hadn't handed me enough rage fuel, I found something in my mailbox at the temporary apartment I was renting downtown. It was a glossy, folded newsletter. The Clearview Chronicle, HOA's very own propaganda pamphlet. Right there on the front page, in bold Arial, was the headline, "Community Under Threat. Newcomer Disrupts Harmony, Ignores Rules." My name wasn't used, but the description was unmistakable. Non-member homebuilder, out-of-state money, refuses to cooperate with HOA guidelines. They were setting me up, isolating me, preparing the ground for whatever came next. And they had no idea they were handing me ammunition. Mark called that night. "We're filing for a temporary restraining order tomorrow. I want an emergency hearing within 72 hours. What are the odds it gets approved?" "That depends on the judge. But once we show the forged consent letter, the unauthorized boundary overlay, and the blockade, they'll realize this isn't just overreach. It's a coordinated fraud attempt." I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the printed signature in my lap. "They didn't just try to stop me from entering my home," I said. "They tried to erase the fact it was ever mine in the first place." Mark didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We were past the point of paperwork. Now it was war. The hearing was set for Friday morning. Emergency docket, downtown courthouse. Mark said we'd only get 20 minutes, tops. But he had 3 sworn declarations, 2 video exhibits, and a color-coded timeline ready to shove down the court's throat. The night before, I couldn't sleep. Not out of nerves, but anticipation. I wanted it on the record. I wanted someone in a black robe to look at the blockade, at the fake documents, at the HOA's smug little newsletter, and call it what it was: trespassing, fraud, and a coordinated attempt to steal jurisdiction that never belonged to them. We arrived just after 8. Mark looked crisp. I looked like hell, but deliberately so. No suit, just boots, jeans, and the same flannel I'd been wearing the day the HOA clowns tried to film me like some intruder. Let the judge see who they were trying to evict. The opposing counsel was a stringy man named Harold Leeds, fresh off the HOA's retainer. He looked like the kind of guy who'd write angry Yelp reviews for city parks. He opened with something about protecting community standards and how my client was destabilizing neighborhood cohesion. Mark stood. "Your Honor, my client isn't destabilizing anything. He's trying to enter his own home." Then he dropped the bomb. The forged letter blown up on a screen behind us, next to a certified sample of my actual signature and a comparison analysis by a handwriting specialist Mark had pulled in overnight. Silence. Leads shifted. The judge leaned forward slightly. "I assume you've filed a criminal referral with the district attorney's office." "We have, Your Honor." Additionally, we are seeking an immediate restraining order preventing the HOA from entering, obstructing, surveilling, or making contact with the plaintiff or his property. Leeds tried to object, but the judge cut him off. "Mr. Leeds, this document bears a false signature. That's not a civil matter. That's criminal. Your Honor, the HOA president may have acted outside standard protocol." Mark didn't even flinch. "We've also submitted video evidence of 2 HOA compliance officers physically blocking my client's gate, threatening him with police involvement, and claiming jurisdiction they do not have. That's false imprisonment and intimidation." Judge Morrison glanced at the bailiff, then back at us. "Motion granted. Immediate injunction issued. All representatives of Clearview Pines HOA are hereby barred from any interference with the plaintiff's property pending full review." Boom. We left the courthouse with the order in hand like a trophy, but the HOA didn't go quietly. That weekend, neighbors, some I hadn't even met, started receiving flyers, folded, handwritten notes in mailboxes. "Protect our community. Say no to uncontrolled development." My house, blurred and grayscaled, featured on the back like a mugshot. Then came the emails. Concerned residents writing to the local newspaper claiming I had brought in unauthorized contractors and questionable utilities. It was all crap, of course, but it didn't matter. They were muddying the water. Fighting in the court of public opinion. Mark had seen it coming. Classic deflection. They're hoping to polarize the community and turn it into a referendum on you. Don't bite. Stay factual. We'll handle the legal side. But I couldn't just sit back. So I wrote my own letter, an open statement to the community, published in the Salt Lake City Tribune that Monday. I laid out the facts. Not just about my lot and the forged map, but about the culture of coercion HOA boards like this one use to expand their power. I included scanned copies of the deed, the CC&Rs that excluded my lot, and the drone footage showing the illegal blockade. By Tuesday, it was the top story on the Tribune's local site, and then something shifted. I got a call from a neighbor down the hill, Greg Feynman, retired prosecutor. I'd never spoken to him before. His voice was calm, serious. "Just wanted to say," he said, "I read your letter. I believe you, and you're not the only one they've tried this with." "Excuse me." "They tried the same boundary stunt on my son's property a year ago. Threatened his building permit if he didn't voluntarily join. He caved. They own people through fear." I stared at the phone in silence. Greg didn't wait for a response. "If you need me to testify, I'm in." These people have been pushing their luck for years. And just like that, I realized I wasn't just building a legal case. I was building a rebellion. The Monday after Greg called, I sat in the back of Mark's office with a notepad full of names, neighbors, mostly older, who had reached out after the article. Turns out, once someone breaks the silence, others stop whispering too. I'd heard from a landscaper who'd been harassed for using unapproved mulch, a woman fined $200 for putting up a Halloween skeleton, and a retired couple threatened with legal action over inadequate mailbox symmetry. All from Clearview Pines HOA. By midweek, the tide had turned. My case was no longer just a personal boundary dispute. It was a crack in the foundation of a regime. And that regime, still trying to wallpaper over the cracks with threats and fake smiles. Wednesday morning, I woke up to a thud at my temporary apartment door. No envelope, just a folded printout slid under the frame. One page. No return address, no signature. It read, "Your professional record isn't as clean as you think. Think hard before making more noise. HOA lawyers play for keeps." That was a new one. I took a photo and forwarded it to Mark, who responded with a single word, "Admissible." And then came the real stunt. Friday, I returned to the house. Now that we had the injunction, the gate had been unsealed, the boards removed by sheriff's order, and the perimeter cleared. I pulled into my driveway for the first time in 3 weeks. The gravel crunched under my tires like a sigh of relief, and waiting at the edge of my driveway, in his cheap aviators and still wrinkled HOA polo, was him, Doug Brimson, the ex-Marine clipboard guy, the one who filmed me on day one. Except now, he wasn't filming. He was holding a manila envelope and pacing like he was working up the nerve to say something dumb. Spoiler alert, he succeeded. "Thought you might want to see this," he said, holding out the envelope like a bribe in a bad spy movie. "I didn't take it. You're not supposed to be here. Injunction says 50 feet, minimum." "Yeah, well," he muttered, "this ain't HOA business. It's personal." He opened the envelope himself and fanned out a handful of photos, grainy shots of me leaving a bar. One from behind, me helping Mia get into a car. Another that looked like it was taken through a restaurant window. My spine went cold. Doug leaned in, voice low. "You keep dragging Karen through court. Maybe this stuff ends up somewhere less friendly. News maybe. Employer, state board." I stared at him, quiet, let it hang. Then I reached into my jacket, pulled out my phone, and flipped the screen toward him. It was already recording. His face did a full system reboot. He stammered something, turned to leave, then tripped over his own foot trying to bolt down the hill. I called Mark. 2 hours later, we filed an emergency motion to expand the restraining order and open a new civil suit for harassment, blackmail, and attempted defamation. By the next morning, Doug Brimson's name was on a sheriff's bulletin, and his footage was in digital lockup as evidence. The best part, he left his little envelope behind. That gave Mark what he needed to bring criminal intimidation charges. By Sunday, the sheriff's office confirmed Doug had obtained several of the photos by accessing traffic camera logs using credentials he had from a private security license, one that expired 2 years ago. That made it wire fraud. He was arrested Monday morning. We didn't need a press release. The mugshot said enough. And inside the courtroom, 2 days later, he folded. Right there on the stand. Tried to pass the blame. Claimed Karen had encouraged him to monitor Evan's movements in case he did anything that could damage HOA property values. Mark leaned forward slowly, like a man savoring the last sip of a 40-year-old scotch. "So just to be clear," he asked, "you were surveilling a man on private property and in public venues without a warrant, with the intent to extort or discredit him under informal orders from your HOA president?" Doug blinked. "Yeah, that's about right. We didn't need a jury. Judge threw the book at him. 12 months probation, $75,000 in damages, and an immediate ban on working in any legal real estate or security-adjacent field." I left the courthouse to a silent crowd of reporters, not because the press hadn't shown up, but because every single one of them was busy typing. And Karen, she was next. I'd always thought courtroom victories would feel cleaner. Like a bell rings, the judge bangs the gavel, and everyone knows who won. But in real life, victories don't echo. They sting, they bruise, and they always come with paperwork. Karen's face wasn't in the courtroom when Doug got sentenced, but she might as well have been carved into the bench. His confession tied her directly to the surveillance, the extortion attempt, and what Mark called a culture of coercive control. And yet, as of that Monday morning, she still held the title of president of the Clearview Pines HOA. Not for long. By Wednesday, we filed the civil suit. Fraud, trespass, slander, forgery, unlawful detainment, and malicious abuse of process. A clean 6-count punch to the gut of everything she'd built her little kingdom on. The accompanying injunction was swift and brutal. The judge ordered the HOA to immediately cease any contact or interference with my property, to remove any claims of jurisdiction over the lot from all public maps and documents, to disclose all communications regarding boundary amendments, property consents, and internal enforcement directives. Mark's team hand-delivered the ruling to the HOA office. Within 2 hours, they had a sheriff's car outside to make sure compliance wasn't optional. The financial audit came next. Turns out, once you pop the hood on a mismanaged HOA, you don't just find rust, you find smoke, duct tape, and someone charging the community for 5-star administrative retreats. HOA members learned they'd been footing the bill for Karen's monthly steakhouse dinners, consulting fees to her cousin's landscaping company, and a golf cart listed as community patrol vehicle that was parked in her driveway the whole damn time. By Friday, the HOA board collapsed. 2 members resigned. One tried to deny knowing anything until Mark produced an email where he'd approved the gate blockade, complete with an emoji. It didn't play well in court. With no functioning leadership, the county appointed a third-party administrator, a retired judge named Mary Ann Vogel, to oversee operations until a full audit and election could be completed. She showed up the next day in a brown Honda Civic with zero tolerance for bullshit and a clipboard that made grown men sweat. "I'm here to clean house," she told the press. And no, I don't mean the kind with vacuum cleaners. Karen, meanwhile, did what tyrants always do when the walls start crumbling. She played the victim, claimed her intentions were misunderstood, that the expanded boundaries were to ensure safety, and that she was being targeted by a man who didn't respect the norms of community living. That line might have worked, except that same day, her HOA email account was subpoenaed. And what we found? Oh, it was poetry. Memos to the board discussing how to encourage outliers to comply through enforcement optics. Drafts of fake consent letters with placeholder names. And one particularly elegant phrase, "The Hill should be unified, with or without their cooperation." The judge didn't need much more. The ruling was historic, at least in county terms. The court affirmed I was the sole and exclusive owner of my lot. It confirmed my property was never subject to HOA jurisdiction. It declared all HOA actions against me as illegal, retaliatory, and punitive in nature. And it awarded $420,000 in damages and punitive fines, split between HOA insurance and personal liability from Karen and the remaining board. But the real moment, the one that tasted like justice, came in the very last paragraph of the ruling. Effective immediately, the Clearview Pines HOA was placed under mandatory external oversight for a minimum of 3 years, with any enforcement actions requiring independent audit and legal review. I hadn't just won my house back. I'd ended their rule, and yet, as Mark warned, it wasn't over, because Karen had just filed her appeal. I didn't even hear about the state investigation until I saw my own name on the evening news. It started like this. A CBS affiliate ran a short segment on the wildly aggressive HOA lawsuit out of Clearview Pines. Footage showed the sealed gate, the courtroom sketches, even an awkward close-up of me from a drone shot, probably from the same footage we submitted as evidence. Then came the kicker. A state prosecutor had opened a formal inquiry into predatory HOA governance across Salt Lake County. Apparently, my case was the final straw. They weren't just coming for Karen, they were coming for all of them. Mark nearly choked on his coffee. "They're bringing in the state," he said, scrolling the article. That's beautiful. They're going to start pulling records from HOAs that haven't seen sunlight in 20 years. By Friday, a joint task force was announced, comprising the state's Attorney General's Office, the Department of Real Estate, and the Office of Consumer Protection. The investigation would target HOA fraud involving forged documents and boundary expansions, unlawful fines and penalties levied without due process, abuse of compliance committees used to coerce or intimidate homeowners. Clearview Pines was on the front page of it all, but as it turned out, they weren't the only ones playing God with the rulebook. Reports flooded in from other neighborhoods. People bullied into surrendering land rights, retirees threatened with foreclosure over lawn length, families penalized for flying the wrong flag. Suddenly, HOA abuse wasn't just my war, it was a statewide reckoning. Karen, now officially stripped of her title, issued a statement through her lawyer. Mrs. Slayton maintains she acted within the guidelines provided to her. Any irregularities were the result of internal miscommunications. Classic non-apology nonsense. Too bad for her, the prosecutor wasn't buying it. 2 weeks later, I was subpoenaed to provide sworn testimony as part of the grand jury proceedings into HOA corruption. Mark coached me beforehand, but honestly, I didn't need much help. I had receipts. I had timelines. I had printed quotes from the committee compliance directives that read like amateur fascism with a stationary budget. The Assistant Attorney General, Rodriguez, listened carefully, never interrupting, just nodding and scribbling like a man assembling a guillotine one bolt at a time. "Mr. Rachel," he said near the end, "did anyone ever inform you of a process to contest your inclusion in the HOA?" "No, because there wasn't one. I never joined. They just claimed me." "And did you ever receive a ballot vote or invitation to board meetings?" "No. In fact, I was denied entry to one. They said I was a non-citizen." Their words. He nodded again. "Thank you. That's all." The next morning, I read the headlines over black coffee in my now unblocked kitchen. State Grand Jury reviewing HOA fraud across Utah. Former HOA president named in criminal conspiracy probe. Private property public rage. The war on rogue HOAs begins. My inbox exploded. Law students, homeowners, journalists. A podcast asked me to appear on an episode titled HOA Hellscapes. And then came the letter. It was hand-delivered by a courier in a black vest. A formal apology from the interim HOA board of Clearview Pines. 3 pages of legal groveling. An admission that their leadership failed in its duties, that the boundaries were misrepresented, and that my experience highlighted systemic gaps in oversight. They even offered to pay for fence repairs and 6 months of private security. I didn't even read the last page. I just forwarded the PDF to Mark with a subject line that said, "Too little, way too late." Then I picked up my phone and dialed a contractor I knew from a previous build. "Hey," I said, "I need you to design me a sign. Big one. Weatherproof." "What's it gonna say?" I smiled. "Something clear, something with teeth." I had the sign installed the following week. 6 feet wide, laminated aluminum, weather-sealed and anchored in concrete at the base of my newly paved driveway, facing the street like a warning shot. White letters on matte black. Private property by court order. HOA access. Prohibited trespassers will be recorded, reported, and removed. Underneath that, smaller text. Parcel ID 17. Not subject to Clearview Pines. HOA. Just seeing it there felt like armor. Neighbors slowed as they drove past. Some waved. A few gave tight nods. One woman actually stopped her car, got out, and shook my hand. "Took a lot of guts," she said. "Wish more people had 'em." I didn't ask what they'd done to her. I already knew the pattern. Control disguised as order, power hidden under community standards. Inside, the house was mine again. The silence was clean. Not the silence of exile, but of ownership. Mia brought over a bottle of rye and a pair of glasses with unneighborly etched across them. "A gift," she said. I toasted to her. She toasted to court orders and reinforced fences. We both laughed, but I wasn't done. See, I wasn't content with a courtroom win and a metal sign. No, I wanted the playbook changed. So when the state offered to let me contribute to their HOA Policy Reform Commission, I said yes without hesitation. I testified again. This time in front of lawmakers, explained how private property had been quietly annexed into someone else's rules, how signatures were forged, surveillance was weaponized, and homeowners were silenced through shame and threats. I brought them the receipts, the newsletter clippings, the consent form they tried to float past the county recorder's office. By summer, they passed the first draft of what would become the Utah Homeowner Protection Act. It mandated independent oversight for all HOA jurisdiction changes, mandatory owner consent verified by third parties, severe penalties for forged documents and unapproved surveillance, and the cherry on top, HOAs were now legally required to disclose their enforcement practices publicly. No more backroom threats, no more secret compliance patrols. Karen Slayton was indicted in August. 2 counts of felony fraud, 1 count of conspiracy to intimidate a property owner, and obstruction of justice. The courtroom was packed. She looked smaller without her badge of office, just another middle-aged bureaucrat caught in her own trap. Doug Brimson showed up to support her, didn't speak, didn't dare. She was denied bail, awaiting trial. Meanwhile, I published a short essay in American Legal Review. The title, "Where the HOA Ends, Freedom Begins." It went viral in some niche legal circles. I even got invited to speak at a panel next spring, Property Rights in the Age of Overreach. Still deciding if I'll go. One evening, I stood at the edge of my property, watching the sun drop behind the pines, casting long shadows across the hillside. The place felt different now. Not just because the HOA was gone, or because the gate was gone, or because Karen was gone, because I had taken it back, every inch of it. A man once told me you don't really own land, you just borrow it from the future. If that's true, I'll make damn sure the future never has to deal with what I did.